Welcome everybody, and I am always delighted. I am always delighted with my guests, but genuinely delighted. That's not to say I'm not delighted with my previous other guests, but to have a genuine thought leader in his space. I'm Seth Marrs, all the way from Houston, Texas, from Forrester, where Seth is going to help us and me understand guided selling, or as your blog said, supercharging sales with dynamic guided selling. And Seth wrote this back February 2020, so just over 10 months ago this was written, and it really caught my eye and my attention. So Seth, thank you. A bit of your story, a bit of background, then let's dive into this to see where this takes us.
Yeah, great. Yeah, thanks for having me. It's good to be here. My background is really in sales operations, customer success. I've been doing that for over 20 years across many different businesses, many different industries. And the role I play at Forrester is really researching in that space. And the way that our part of the business works is you bring in experienced practitioners that work with clients to understand and understand what they're going through and be able to provide our expertise support to help them as they go through, but also to research and stay on the cutting edge of what's happening in the market, because that plays a really big role in advising and guiding our clients. In this space, I mean, we call it dynamic guided selling, and the reason we call it that is because when I first look back at guided selling, if you were to go look on the internet and search, what you would find is two real variants. One would be the guided selling piece, which is e-commerce. And that makes a lot of sense because e-commerce is highly visible, huge transaction volume. There's a lot of this stuff that you could do there. And then you have the other side, which is kind of content guided selling, which is serving up the next piece of content, which I think is a part of this, but not the biggest part. So the dynamic on the end is really to try to bring forward and say, this is much, much more around putting the rep at the center of what you're doing, and taking all the information around them and really using that to help them succeed in closing more deals. And weirdly enough, that usually isn't the focus of most of these tools. So yeah, it's a really cool space. It's an emerging space. So right now there are not a lot of people that are doing it, and those that are kind of moving into components around it: sales engagement, revenue intelligence, doing more complex work around how they guide their content. But it is, to me, where things are going, and it'll holistically change how you sell. It'll also have a halo effect across forecasting, across how you do compensation planning, how you do a lot of other things.
Awesome. And I know that we touched on this before we came. I always say before we came on air, it feels much more crap than it is. When I initially saw it, and for my listeners, they know my frustrations with, social selling has now lost all meaning from what it originally was intended. Way back when you have modern selling, digital selling, this type of selling, and I thought, oh goodness, here we go, another research paper with which is bulk guided selling or dynamic guided selling in front of it. When I started to, read your thought process and the fact that it is bringing in that B2C / e-commerce kind of learning and behavior into B2B sales, and I can see this working across any B2B organization that is selling a products and services across all industries, I was like, you know what, this is right. This is where this is going, because I see as what's happening in sales, full stop. It's just the consumerization, if you will, of the sales process. Because, and I know it's glib, I know it's cliche, but the Amazon effect, the Uber effect, but they've set a certain bar, an expectation of what a good customer client journey should be, whether those touch points are digital or physical, and we come back into face-to-face sales, or whatever the future of that looks like. And there's this weird thing that in the corporate space, we cross that corporate threshold, and this was even pre-COVID, and we seem to default to what we were doing 20 years ago, because it won't work in a corporate space because that's shopping and that's corporate. So what have you seen through your research, or what do you believe has been the trigger to start to shift this mindset and thinking that there's actually a better way of doing this?
I mean, you touched on it. As a buyer, as a consumer, you're seeing a much better process, right? And you're experiencing a much better process. And it is true. You go B2C and you get all these bells and whistles, this level of service that is it's significantly better than what you see on the B2B side. And that has started to change. Buyers are no longer allowing that to happen, and they're becoming less tolerant of it. So if you look at how sales has evolved, let's not say sales, the buyer has evolved over time. If you go back and look at what we used to talk about around how buyers bought, it was marketing took it to this point, handed it over to sales, sales would close it. That is not how it works today. Today, buyers go wherever they want to go. They use the sales rep as a cog in that chain, a very important one, to be able to determine to pull them in whenever they want to. So they're starting to pull that requirement, that B2C requirement, into B2B and not accepting that lesser level of service. Also, the digitization of a lot of this stuff is really allowing them to do that pretty freely. I mean, we're seeing a significant drop in the contact points that you have with buyers and sellers. That's still incredibly important, but they're less. So when we start talking about, focus on the buyer, we talk about a lot of these concepts that are coming out around revenue engine alignment. One of the things that's not talked about very much is that if you want to serve a buyer in the B2B space like you serve a buyer in the B2C space, marketing and sales have to be hand in hand. You have to be able to go to market together, because that buyer is going in and out of marketing and sales. That handoff doesn't happen. That handoff doesn't happen once. It happens 20 times throughout the buying process, and it happens at the will of the buyer. So if you're not aligned in that scope, you look really bad in that your digital communications to that buyer become very different to your in-person communications from the seller. So that's caused a huge change. That digitization as well has made a lot of things visible. So you'll hear a lot of, you'll see a lot of salespeople that'll push back on it, saying, I can't see as much, I don't get as much time with my clients. Truth is, if you looked across the hall at the marketing team, all the intent data that's being generated from all the work that these sales teams or that these buyers are doing to research, probably more visible than you've ever been able to see it. It just needs to be aggregated, pulled in, and derived into insights for the rep to be able to use to sell better. And that's where a lot of dynamic guided selling comes in, is being able to pull those insights together, internal, external, to give them things to help them in the deal and to help them progress the deal. The part that's really started to make this go faster, even with all these things that were in motion, is obviously COVID-19, because now the digital space has become a reality. I mean, I think we don't believe that things are going to go back to the way they were. They just aren't. One of the main reasons for that is you digitize the buying experience with now doing teleconferencing and video conferencing. That's not going to go away. It's not like it will dip. You'll do less of it, and you'll start to augment that with in-person meetings. But buyers are now comfortable doing video conferences. Sellers are getting comfortable doing video conferences. It's now for those progressive companies a tool in your tool belt to go interact more with clients. And from a sales operations standpoint, it's a chance to add another piece of information into kind of your data set to understand, how do I optimize the way a seller sells, what works, what doesn't, and take that information and aggregate it and use it to make everybody better. Similar to the way you've seen, with some of the sales engagement space with cadences, which is kind of more at the forefront of what's happening. Because they have been able to optimize those. Now that's coming full circle. And that's why you see a lot of these companies investing in conversational intelligence.
Yeah, the conversational intelligence is scary, and it's. I was reading a piece. That's not scary. I think it's fascinating at the same time. You look at Clubhouse in terms of how that's blown up in terms of voice, the whole separate conversation. But to your point around, will we go back to normal? There's a piece that McKinsey released at the end of last year, where I think they surveyed like 3,500 buyers of services, etc. And it was like 15% of those respondents said they'd be happy to spend in excess of $1 million on a product or service in a virtual / end-to-end self-serve environment. And it's back to the point, we were talking about earlier, the consumerization of the buying process. Our risk tolerances are also getting higher, because you and I can now buy a house without actually talking to a human being. We could, I'm looking at getting a new car, and it's likely that we'll go through Volvo, and it's likely I'll go through Volvo subscription service. I'll never buy, you bought a car historically on hire purchase, but that was a big down payment. You're locked in for 3 years. Now Volvo, this is going to cost you more on a monthly basis, but you can walk whenever you want. You're covered in this and that. And it's just, if I'm happy to do that, then I'm of course I'm going to be happy to spend $100,000 on a software system without necessarily talking to a rep.
Yeah.
If the buying experience and the journey that guides me to make that right decision, and probably I'm going to, get a referral. Seth, I know you've got that system. Is it any good? What would you do? And that kind of thing. And I've been in sales since year dot. I'm 100 cold calls, ex-recruiter, and we were always told, make sure you enable the purchase. Don't give them a reason not to buy. That's typically where sales processes fall down. You've given them a reason to not do something versus to do something.
Yeah.
What I get when I'm talking to organizations, and we said I'm primarily professional services, so consulting firms and law firms and so on, who are nowhere near where a tech SaaS sales players, where you've got a sales officer or an outreach, that kind of technology supporting that sales ops and sales enablement. It's like, but we haven't got the data to do that, or that's too difficult, or technology doesn't exist to support us in all of that. So what is out there to do this? Is what we're talking about, could you and I, if we were doing this from scratch, actually do this? And then it's around, how does one have to change their processes to meet the new world order of what the buyer expectations are?
Well, I don't think there's very many tech, non-tech companies that are doing this holistically. And a lot of that comes from the fact that many of these vendors, like a content vendor versus an intent vendor versus sales engagement versus revenue intelligence, all quoting tools, all of those vendors are competing to be the face of to be that pane of glass in front of the buyer or the seller.
Yeah.
In the end, only one of them will be, but I don't see many companies that are able to do that, because high-tech companies have just as bad of data issues as companies that wouldn't be necessarily in that space, especially when you're talking about aggregating together and analyzing all at once. The good thing that we're seeing, and what I would say like true dynamic guided selling, we aren't there yet. Like the technology pieces are all there, but there's no aggregator. Like people will talk CRM as an aggregator, it's not. It's more an aggregator of base data percent or to a certain extent, or a write back for a lot of these systems. But that needs to still be analyzed, and there's a lot of it aggregated in ways that your systems have to be set up to handle. What we're seeing is the practice that we're talking to a lot of companies, because they're asking similar questions, is right. Okay, well, let's analyze these different spaces and find the one that's most impactful for you. Ideally, you already have it, because you'd be shocked at how many times we talk to companies who bought a product and aren't optimizing it. So I buy a sales engagement product and I just give it to all my reps and go use it. And that's not really how you maximize the sales engagement platform. So what we see is, and the way we work with our clients, is to get them to look at the holistic kind of what's possible and pick the piece that's most important to you and go get value from that. And then slowly build your way out into all the other pieces as necessary, So eventually you'll have that holistic approach. So it's kind of, we are very early in this game. But we're starting to see a lot of activity around it. There are companies acknowledging that this is where they want to go, even though they don't have the suite to actually get there. But you're also seeing partnerships form with some of these companies around trying to make that happen. So early stage, we're close in terms of the visions there and the tools are there. Data aggregation, analysis, and output back to a rep to be able to do it kind of full scale is still, I'd say, 1 to 3 years out.
Okay. So, I mean, I guess in some respects then for any listeners is that actually now really is the time to start thinking about this, talking to the likes of you and Forrester to help guide them on that journey of what this looks like and where this is going to go. And I'm guessing we're probably going to see some consolidation in the market. You know, could an outreach sales loft look at the valuations they both got recently in a pandemic, north of $1 billion.
Crazy.
So the investors obviously believe in all of this. You know, might we see some consolidation in that space of them going, you know what, we're going to buy the content provider, we're going to buy an intent data and just bring it all into our space and maybe start to try and take on the likes of Microsoft and Salesforce at their own game in some respects?
Yeah, you're definitely, I definitely think you're going to see consolidation in the market. You're also going to see some of these vendors expanding out. So I think what you'll see is they'll take a kind of a hybrid approach to that. Is there are certain distinctly different types of tools, but then there's others that you could look at sales engagement, revenue intelligence, and go, okay, those two spaces could very easily expand, and you can see companies already starting to edge into those spaces. But then there's other stuff like the complexity of a quoting platform or the complexity of a CMS or a content management system. Going and building that from scratch doesn't really make sense. So you would aggregate, and you'd see it. I think you'll see it either through acquisition or through partnership. So it's
well, it makes
fast
sense.
Moving space.
Because you know, I remember this was, you know, way back when it was I want to say Gwen Stefani. It's not Gwen Stefani at all. It's Fallon Fatemi, who recently sold Nose to Sugar CRM. You know, she was talking about this back in 2015, and then we saw end of last year, C3.ai tying up with Dynamics, tying up with Adobe Marketing Cloud, to kind of bring this all into one place to free up the sellers to sell more. But I think, you know, I agree with you in terms of your point. Everything is focused on getting the salesperson to sell better, not necessarily focusing on the end result, which is a better experience for the customer. And you're seeing, you know, LinkedIn Sales Solutions are coming out with a narrative, you know, now buyer first approach. You know, organizations again are talking about we're going to be client centric and this and that. And I was taught this 20 years ago when all I had was a telephone, that the customers all, you know, most of the time always right, and they should come first. You've got 2 ears and 1 mouth and use them in that order. Will we? And I know that your research is showing this, that obviously the buyer expectation is changing, but do you think we'll see a flip where we start to focus more, or maybe even bring the buyer into that buying process of, hey, you buy from us, what should we be doing to make this better for you? We're thinking of getting this piece of tech. Do you think that should be useful in terms of how you perceive us or engage with us? I don't know.
Yeah, it's going to be flipped. I mean, an example, kind of an ancillary non-tech example is you're seeing, like, consider the idea of a contract environment, right? Where you go in, you sign a contract with a company and you get 12, 18, 24 months. That is the standard kind of practice for SaaS companies. They want the contract. The market wants contracts, so you see everybody pushing to sign contracts. Buyers don't want a contract.
Nope.
They want month to month, and they want to have value out of what they're getting. And if there's value, I keep it. If there's not value, I move to something else. No business wants that. No company would want that level of unpredictable kind of that unpredictable of a situation. But if you look, like I do a lot of research also on the compensation side, we're seeing a very big wave of companies being forced into it. Because and that manifests itself into how the hell compensate my employees for this, because now they're not selling a contract in the future. Now I have to pay them, and that changes your model, it changes everything. But that's what the customer in the end really wants. But very few companies want to give that to them, because there's a lot that goes into that. It's very dangerous to go that way. But as new competitors come into that space that are willing to do that, to take market share, as the environment changes, you're going to see more and more companies forced into that. And that is that is the ultimate buyer situation, right? I pay by the drink, I get what I want. If I like it, I stay. If I don't like it, I don't stay. So that's where a buyer wants it to go, and eventually they'll get their way. It's just how long will it take for that inertia to kind of kick in?
Yeah, I've always thought about sort of subscription services in that space. But you look at Netflix has just tipped over 200 million, whatever it is, subs. You look at Disney ripped all their content from Netflix, going, hang on a second, we can do this all ourselves. And I'm now paying Netflix, I'm now paying Disney because the kids want Disney. And as long as the content is there and it's delivering what I want, I'll stay. And it's a bit like that example of Volvo cars. As long as the car is doing what I want it to do, and I get the service from Volvo when I need the service, I'm happy to pay a premium because it's doing what I want it to do. But the compensation piece in sales is a big nut to crack, because you said shareholder value and the whole thing. Month on month and quarter on quarter targets, we know drives really crap behavior, because you get at the end of the month. The buyers wait to the end of the month, to the end of the quarter, because they know they can push the rep on those numbers. And the compensation conversation in the world of law and accounting, where it's time and line and 6-minute increments, the same rules apply. People are like, I don't want to pay for your time, I want to pay for value and service. You figure out how to deliver that to me in the most effective way that's going to make you money, right?
Think of the two examples you just gave with Disney and Netflix. Netflix and Disney spend billions and billions and billions of dollars on content. You can cancel their service next week.
Yeah.
So literally, Netflix is a pay-by-month service. You can cancel next week. They're banking on giving you good enough content that your value, that their value proposition is to a level where you're going to keep paying that monthly fee. Because if you decide you don't like them, you're gone. Which is a crazy model to even think about, considering you spend $500 million on a movie.
But then I guess that's where, and again, why I enjoyed your piece so much, because it's like, it's bringing everything together. That whole, sales and marketing needs to be hand in hand. The intent data piece, ideal customer profiles. It's kind of all out there. What was interesting, I think this was last summer, so when we were just in first kind of lockdown, with a CX chap called Peter Dorrington. He said what he's also seeing is that a lot of companies are having to rip up the rule book, because their previous buying data, especially in the consumer world, was now irrelevant because people aren't buying that anymore, aren't buying the way they used to anymore, because we can't, because we're here and it's kind of virtual. And I guess the same is going to be happening for marketing teams in the B2B space that were kind of already doing some of this. Is like, well, now we really do need website visit data, because our reps aren't going out face to face anymore. Now I really do need LinkedIn Premium to understand who's looking at my profile. I do need all this, but what I find, it's I'm just not skilled to do this. I don't even know where to start. Or it's I've now got the data. Now what? Now what do I do to do something different, rather than looking at that going, oh, that's nice, back to the day job. So do you believe that part of this, and I'm always very careful about using the word AI, but we'll start to see, I know like Dynamics, for example, has its intelligence system, Salesforce has got Einstein.
Yeah.
Do you believe that AI will I think I know what the answer is on this, is going to play a part in helping that guided process? So the rep literally comes in, quasi minority report, if you will, and they just go through the motions almost?
Yeah, it'll be foundational.
A salesperson, but I can potentially see it going that way. I don't know.
Yeah, it'll be foundational, because it allows for rapid kind of understanding and implementation of information. You hear a lot about AI. AI is kind of the cliche thing to talk about right now. Most companies that are claiming AI are doing very rudimentary AI. There's very few companies that are really top tier. largely because in a lot of cases, B2B doesn't generate enough data to even understand it. So in order for AI to work, you need huge volumes of data. You have that in the B2C space, especially around e-commerce, so AI can be much more effective there. B2B space has a ton of data, but that's where kind of dynamic guided selling comes in. It's all trapped in all these different systems, not aggregated together. So you can't get, I mean, the classic example, like everyone's known for years that if I can understand how my reps approached their activities, that I can derive insights from that that'll allow me to better improve how they sell. The problem is no rep even if you get a rep entering it, another rep enters it differently. It's just completely inconsistent. Some companies that have overcome that. Revenue intelligence tools have overcome that by just taking the rep out of it and putting it all directly in the system so they can see it. So you eliminate that as a barrier. But until you have that volume of data, AI is going to be hard pressed to be effective. We're seeing it in a lot of cases where they're using AI, like some systems are using AI, like when you're on a call like this, as you're talking, it's searching, going through and being able to surface insights so the rep can literally see and use that information while they're talking to the client
in real
to
time,
better the conversation. So yeah, that exists today.
There was conversational intelligence in terms of recording the calls and then go back through that, and high performing rep, they do or don't say this and for coaching, but I hadn't quite realized it got to the point that there's tech out there which can enable a rep in, like Minority Report where you're talking and the stuff on the side is coming up on Vision, AR, Google Glass. So that capability exists today.
Yeah, that capability exists today. The funny thing about all that stuff, because everyone gets caught up in the cool stuff about it and what it can do, and it's incredibly exciting. But most companies, when you start having these discussions and you ask them, how do you define an account, and show me your account data, show me how your data links together, it's a mess. And none of this stuff works if you don't have a data structure that allows you to align everything to what you're trying to accomplish. And most companies fall asleep when you start talking about that part. They like the cool stuff. They love the what it can be, but then you go, well, this is all here for you, but it's going to give you kind of a jumbled look because your data infrastructure is so poorly aligned. It can't derive insights because it has no way to connect to it and effectively link these things together.
And that's been true of CRM systems and data for eons, for decades. Crap in, crap out. It doesn't matter how good or bad how good the tech is. If you're feeding it poor data to start with, it's just going to amplify how bad the data is in the.
But it's so boring. Yeah, it's so boring to people that it's weird how that's kind of taken for granted because it's hard to do. It's not very exciting, and it's hard to invest money in that type of stuff because the ROI around it is huge in a macro perspective, but from a micro, I make this investment and I get a reward. It's nothing. So it's very hard for companies to invest, but you have to. If you don't have a strategy around that and a structure that allows you to enable that, I mean, all non-complex sales are going to eventually go e-commerce. Complex sales are going to be sold to complex customers. Like if you take hospital networks, for an example, hospital networks are filled with like 200 different places. It's just a huge, complicated network, and they're buying and selling their facilities all the time. If you can't get a handle around that, how do you know what to sell to them? How do you know how to go to market to them?
No, it's fascinating. So I could talk about this for years, and I'm glad that hours, I don't know what years, but what I'm also glad about is that this is the beginning of this journey, and it's great to hear. I think it's going to be reassuring for listeners and viewers that is the beginning of the journey. So if an organization, no matter what the industry is serious about looking at dynamic guided selling, what would your advice be as a starting point? Where do they start thinking about, okay, we're here today, we want to try and get here in 12 to 18 months. What might that journey look like for them?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest thing is to assess what your capabilities are around these different areas and what would be the biggest impact. Understanding what those are, what is revenue intelligence, what is sales engagement, what are these different platforms that are out there that can help me? Do I already have them? Is this a process issue? And I just need to optimize? Do I need to connect them together? And how should I do that? It's understanding where you are and then where you want to go, and then taking measured steps. That's where we spend a lot of time with clients working through it. There's several posts that I've done in addition to the one that you referenced that talks through, myself and a colleague of mine, Ann Slough, when we did a presentation at our summit for Europe and for Asia. We talked through the 6 components, and we have a blog for each one of them that's accessible for you, for everyone in the audience, that just talks through what the value is of it, what it can be. Just start combining that, looking together. That's a key piece. The other side is you've got to figure out a way to align sales and marketing. And if you aren't doing, and the best way I could put it for a sales leader is, right now you have all the internal insights and marketing has all the external insights. The only way for you to be successful is to combine those together. And if you don't find a way to do that, then it's going to be hard for you to be successful, because it's no longer a handoff. It's a collaborative effort to sell.
Selling is a team sport. I think I saw someone talk around on LinkedIn earlier today. Seth, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for affording me the time. Where's the best place for me to send people to find you, to find that blog and connect? And if anybody wants to have further conversations about how Forrester can support them on this journey, what's the best route to you?
Yeah, just LinkedIn. It would probably be the best, or Twitter.
LinkedIn or Twitter. Well, I'll make sure I put both handles in this YouTube video somewhere. I'm not very good at this bit yet.
Yeah.
And for those that are listening, I'll put it obviously in the link to the podcast channel there. But Seth, thank you so much. I'm looking forward to following you and the team on this journey, because I genuinely believe that this is the only way forwards for sales organizations in terms of where the future is taking us. But Seth, thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Great to be with you today.
And to everybody else that's listening, as always, thanks for tuning in. We've just tipped 3,000 downloads, which is awesome. If you want to be on this podcast, you know what to do. Otherwise, stay safe wherever you are in the world, and I'll see you all on the flip side.